Fam, thank you for joining me today. My name is Jaymeswallace, and this is where I like to come to discuss solved and unsolved true crime cases, true crime facts and stats, and missing person cases that I don't feel have gotten enough attention from mainstream media. If you're interested in true crime, like I am, then you have come to the right place. I do hope that you will subscribe to my channel, and if you press the little bell next to the subscribe button, YouTube will notify you whenever I upload new content. The cases that I discuss are true cases. I do not sugarcoat things. I give details and show pictures when they are available. So let me warn you ahead of time that my videos are intended for mature audiences only. The stories that I tell are disturbing to say the least. But evil does not go away simply because we bury our heads in the sand. So I've chosen to discuss them no matter how difficult. Today's case is no exception. So viewer, beware. This video is about the heinous crimes of Jeremycordwoods, born in 1972, so at the time this video is being recorded, he is 50 years old. He is being housed currently in the Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge, Montana, and is inmate number 35713. He is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences for 2 counts of deliberate homicide. There is not a lot of information to be found on the internet about this case, which to me is baffling. I couldn't find even one photo of the victims in this case. However, his smug grin is easily found, which makes me sick. Had he not at one time been my stepbrother, I would have never even heard of this case, which to me is really sad. I want to preface this by saying that Jeremy was already incarcerated by the time my dad married his mom, and I adored his mother. She was a wonderful woman. She was sweet. She loved animals, was very intelligent, and had a huge heart. Although she, of course, still loved her son up until the day that she passed away, she could never understand how he could do the horrendous things that he did. And it was heartbreaking to see the pain and inner conflict that she went through every single time that somebody mentioned his name. Jeremy was born in Helena, Montana, and was raised both there and in Seattle, Washington. As a teenager, he dabbled in drug use and enjoyed drinking beer. He also spent some time in juvenile lockup for both burglary and forgery. When Jeremy Woods was 20, he began dating an 18-year-old named Dawn Wallace, and they resided in Helena, Montana. She had a 17-month-old son, and her son's name was James. When they originally met, she already had this boy, okay? After dating for only a couple weeks, they got engaged and they moved in together. Jeremy was employed making minimum wage at an arcade, and he didn't realize how much more money he would need in order to care for 2 more people. Bills were piling up. The more stressed out he felt, the more he would take it out on Dawn. He started juggling home life, his regular job, and doing random side work to make ends meet, but he felt like he was drowning and there was no end in sight. He was stressed out about money, bills, and suddenly having a ready-made family, and he used methamphetamines and alcohol more frequently. He became increasingly more verbally and physically abusive towards Dawn. He showed James very little to no attention. He would have no patience if James would cry or make noise or make a mess, constantly yelling at Dawn to take care of the kid. Don't you hear him crying? Stuff like that. Dawn was scared of Jeremy, but she was also afraid to leave him. And she loved him, and she was hoping that things would get better. I wish she would have left him when she had the chance. So Jeremy is sick of working all the time and having very little to show for it. He was tired of being broke, so he came up with a plan to scam some fast cash. At first, Dawn was completely against it, but he managed to persuade her. I don't know if it was just with words or if he was abusive and scared her into it. Either way, he did persuade her. And what they decided on was that she would write a bunch of checks from her own bank account out to cash and just pass bad checks at stores and such, knowing that she didn't have the money in the bank to cover it. Remember that this was back in the 90s, and they didn't have the technology that exists now, and it took weeks for banks and stores to figure out that a check was no good. He convinced her to write the bad checks by lying and telling her that he was getting a raise at work and that he would be able to put the money in bank to cover them before they would get in any trouble. Whether or not she believed that, I don't know. The couple, though, They'd spent thousands of dollars from bad checks. They went on shopping sprees, they ate out in fancy restaurants, they bought lots of toys for baby James. But soon, Jeremy realized that the cops would be notified and they would be in a little bit of trouble. Woods stated that he felt trapped, he wanted out of this relationship, he wanted his freedom back, and he didn't know how to make a clean breakaway from Dawn. He thought if he could kill Dawn, then he could say that she ran off with her ex, and Woods could pin all the bad checks as her idea, and he would get away free and clear. He planned it for days, and then one day he thought, well, it's now or never. So when Dawn was at home, she was in the shower. When she got out, he was ready, and he ambushed her. He socked her, he threw her on the bed, and beat on her a little bit. She didn't know why. She was crying, and she had no idea she was about to die. I mean, she's been beat by him before. He tied her hands to the headboard and tied her down to the bed so she couldn't get up. And then he heard baby James screaming in the other room for his mom. And he got up off of her, and he went to the crib where 20-month-old James was crying. Dawn was screaming and crying from the other room, still tied up to the bed and begging him not to hurt her son. Jeremy ripped the cord off the vacuum cleaner. He wrapped it around the toddler's neck and tied the other end to the crib. And then he left the room, leaving James hanging to death from the side of his crib. Dawn could hear her baby crying and struggling and then go silent. And then Jeremy returned to their room, and she was obviously going to be hysterical. And he kept yelling at her to shut up, and he began hitting her again. And he ripped the phone cord off the home phone, wrapped it around her neck, and pulled it tight until she was dead. Feeling accomplished and relieved, Jeremy then put both bodies on the floor in the baby's room. He threw a blanket over them and went to the living room to watch some television and eat some dinner before heading off to bed. Later, he said it was the best night's sleep he ever had. What a piece of shit. The next day, Jeremy went to the police, and he reported Dawn and James as missing. He said he figured she left with her son to get back with an ex-boyfriend of hers. He cried, but he made the police report. The next morning, there was a knock on his door, and it was the police. He was surprised to see them, but they had stopped by to ask some follow-up questions for the missing persons investigation. And he played it off. He was friendly. He invited them in. He answered the questions and convinced them that he had absolutely nothing to do with their disappearance and didn't know where they were. Meanwhile, had the officers taken a look around, they would have found the bodies that were still laying in the next room with a blanket over them. After the cops left, Jeremy knew he had to get rid of those bodies. So he came up with a plan. He found a 55-gallon drum barrel with a lid. He stuffed them into it and put it in the back of his truck, and about a mile from his home, he dumped the barrel with the two bodies inside in a field near the airport where there were multiple other barrels, and he figured that no one would notice there being just one more extra barrel, and he was right. Nobody noticed. Days after the murders, Jeremy went ahead and went to the news station. He thought that it would help him look more innocent if he could get on the news and plead for his missing girlfriend to return home. The reporter thought he was likable and wanted to help him. She said he seemed sincere. He was crying, all until he offered to take a lie detector test out of nowhere, which made the reporter super suspicious of him. And after asking him questions, and then he left, she went ahead and called the police and spoke to them. And the police officer realized that the description that Jeremy gave to the reporter about what Dawn was wearing when she was last seen was different from the description of what she was wearing that he put in the police report. So now even the cops think he looks suspicious too. And so the next day they show up at his job and they asked him if he'd be willing to take that lie detector test that he was so gracious in offering the day before to take. And he agreed. And he was a little bit nervous, he said, that this would be it for him. But he said it was actually quite easy. He just had to focus on the answers and not showing any emotion, and the son of a bitch passed the lie detector test. So the cops had no evidence, then nothing to go on, and the investigation hit a dead end, and so they got off his ass, at least for the time being. 3 months after the murders, Jeremy started dating a younger woman named Shannon. She, according to Jeremy, had wanted to be with somebody who was older than her so that they could take care of her. She needed to be cared for. And so in that way, Jeremy fulfilled her needs, and then she fulfilled Jeremy's needs by allowing him to use her as a punching bag and control and dominate the relationship. And so it worked for both of them, apparently. This is according to Jeremy. I can't imagine that she said, oh yeah, I was fine with him punching me around. I'm sure that she was not fine with it. Again, he started feeling a little bit trapped, and he was tired of being broke, and instead of working for more money, he was trying to come up with a way to scam some easy cash. And one day he found an old checkbook in his things that was from a closed account from when he lived in Seattle. It was in his name, but the account obviously was closed, no money, and he would use those checks to write bad checks and deposit those checks, the bad ones, into his current good account. And in 2 weeks, he deposited over $100,000 in bad checks from his old account into his new account, as well as cashing around $60,000 in bad checks to 96 different local stores and merchants, including casinos and bars and restaurants. So total in 2 weeks, over $160,000 in bad checks. And he didn't think he was doing anything all that wrong. He didn't figure the cops would waste their time looking for somebody who's writing bad checks on their own account. It's no big deal. He had no idea the gravity of what he was doing, or he just didn't care. October 14th, which is 4 months since the murders, and a bit of time here, about a month of, spending this money, this newfound wealth that he got from scamming from his old accounts and such. Back then, they didn't have the technology that we have now. And so it took weeks, sometimes months, before banks or stores would find out that a check that they had been given was no good. So during that time, he's living it up. He's buying his girlfriend stuff. They're going out to eat. They're, living the good life. And then October 14th, which is 4 months since the murders, a friend of Jeremy's who worked at the Helena Police Department called Jeremy up and said he needed to meet up with him to talk to him about something that was important. So they meet up outside of a convenience store off Main Street, downtown Helena. And his friend lets him know that while he was at work, he saw that there was a warrant out for Jeremy's arrest. And Jeremy was like, well, thanks for the heads up and this and that. It's no big deal. It's got to be a mistake or whatever. And once his friend leaves, he gets on the payphone, which is a box on the corner, usually with a phone in it that you put change in it, and you get to make phone calls. They're not existent dinosaurs now, but, back in the day, us old people, we used to use those. Anyways, he gets on the payphone and he calls Helena Police Department and he asks why he has a warrant and what it's for. He didn't think that cashing bad checks off his own account was a serious crime, so he couldn't understand why there would be a whole warrant out for him. And the officer on the phone asked Woods where he was, and Jeremy told him. And the officer asked him, hey, would you be willing to stay there? I'll send a unit out, and they will discuss with you what the warrant's about. And he agreed. So he waited there, and he was absolutely shocked when officers arrived that they immediately arrested his stupid ass. So his bail set at $100,000, and he was sitting in county, which for 6 weeks he sat there. And he said that was the most depressing time of his life. 6 weeks in jail because he was lonely and he got depressed and he was sad and it was scary and he didn't know when he'd get out and he was facing all this time. And then his father, I'm sure after lots of begging and crying on the little phone, his father put his house up as collateral to bail Jeremy out and help his kid. So Jeremy's released at the end of November after 6 weeks of sitting there, and he had to await his trial that was set for 3 months later. He was facing up to 10 years in prison if he was found guilty if he went to trial, but he planned on pleading guilty. But as it got closer to the trial date, Jeremy started to get nervous and panic, and finally told Shannon he couldn't do it. He was going to jump bail and go on the run, and he offered to take her with him, and she agreed to go. Now, he knew that they would need money, so he opened up a bank account in Dawn's ex-boyfriend's name. Dawn, his murder victim's ex-boyfriend. Apparently, Woods had his birthday and social security number, and so he opened up a bank account and cashed bad checks off this account. And 1 week before trial was set to begin, on February 8th, 1994, Jeremy and Shannon leave Montana in a car that they rented with bad checks, and they headed off west. Now, Jeremy was raised partially in Seattle, Washington, so he felt comfortable there. It was his old stomping ground. He knew his way around, and so that's where they went. And they were only there 2 days when Shannon got really homesick, and they were staying at a motel, and Jeremy decided to go run out and buy food and booze. And while he was gone, Shannon, disobeying Jeremy's direct orders not to call or talk to anybody, called her mom. And during the conversation, she let her know that they were in Seattle and that she was homesick and that she was, visiting Seattle with Jeremy. And during that conversation, Woods returned, and she hurried up and hung up the phone, but it was too late. He had already seen, and she just knew he was going to be pissed, and she was right. He was pissed. And when he found out that she told her mom where they were, he decided they absolutely had to leave, like right now. He knew he couldn't leave a paper trail with checks, so he went and cashed out a few so that when they left, he would have some cash on hand to get them by. And then they abandoned the rental car, and they took a bus to New Orleans, Louisiana. They figured that since New Orleans is a big city, he could disappear into the crowd. The police wouldn't look for him there because he'd never been there before, so there was no ties between him and there. It took only 2 days in New Orleans to go through the money that he had on him, and so he could no longer afford the motel they were staying in. And while he was trying to come up with a new scam to get more money, he and Shannon went to check into a homeless shelter. Now, the shelter did not allow men and women to sleep together at night, and they were not aware that that's how shelters work. Well, Shannon hated it there. She said it was dirty, and she thought that she'd be able to stay next to him, but she couldn't, and she was uncomfortable. She wanted to leave. And a couple days later, she refused to even stay one more night there. So Jeremy knew he couldn't let her leave on her own. It would jeopardize his freedom. He was afraid that if he wasn't watching over her every second, then she would tell somebody where they were and get him busted. So he told her that he would figure out a way to get some money and a place to stay. And they went ahead and left the shelter. And quick thinking, Jeremy decided right off the bat that he was going to take her, and they were going to head over to an area where there were a lot of gay bars. And that way he could hustle up some money from men there. And he says he had never done anything like that before, but I'm calling bullshit. But nevertheless, they headed over there, and they sat in a bar, and he went to work trying to scam men out of their money. And it didn't take him very long to set his sights on an older man named Lewis. He told Lewis that Shannon was just a friend. Lewis told him that he was still in the closet, nobody knew, and that he needed somebody on the down low to keep things nice and quiet. And by the end of the evening, After a bunch of flirting and drinking, all three of them hanging out and partying, Lewis went ahead and rented a motel room for Jeremy and Shannon to stay in. And from there, he became Jeremy's sugar daddy. He gave Jeremy a job. He gave him some cash, gave them food to eat, the motel room to stay in, and in return, Jeremy took care of Lewis's sexual needs. And this new arrangement between Jeremy and Lewis caused a whole new friction between Jeremy and Shannon. She was pissed at how much time and attention that Jeremy was giving to Lewis, and Jeremy was pissed that she didn't appreciate all that he was doing so that they could survive, everything that he was doing for her. So now Jeremy's stressed out again. He's tired of Shannon nagging him and being unappreciative, and he's tired of Lewis not quite meeting all of his needs. Even though he was nice enough to give him all these things, it wasn't enough for him. So now he begins plotting on how he's going to be rid of them both. And the plan, yet again, is to kill them, because he has no balls to just leave somebody. But he has to work out the details, and so it took him a few days. By the end of February, after 3 weeks on the run, Jeremy has decided it is time to kill both Lewis and Shannon, and he knows how he's going to do it. The plan was to take Shannon out first. He bought a leather thong. I'm guessing that he was going to wear for his sugar daddy, but that's beside the point. He bought a leather thong that he planned to use to strangle Shannon with when he got home from work. Then the plan was that he was going to go deal with Lewis. Jeremy knew that Lewis kept a handgun in his car's glove box, and Jeremy was going to go ahead and shoot Lewis with his own gun, steal his cash and his car, and go ahead and just drive away. So after work, he heads home. He goes inside, leather thong in hand, prepared to kill an unsuspecting Shannon, but instead of finding his next victim alone, he walks in, and Shannon is there, but with two police officers that immediately proceed to arrest him. He's throwing a fit. What's going on? You have no right to be in here. What is this about? The officers do not say anything. He says, "How did you know I was here?" And, sorry about that. Cats. I'm playing with my bird. Anyways, and the police officers did not mention how they found him or knew that he was there, but Jeremy knew that Shannon's the one who turned him in. Jeremy was soon extradited right back to Montana, and he was charged with bail jumping, check fraud, and auto theft. In May 1994, he was sentenced to 15 years to be served at the Montana State Prison. Shannon and Lewis narrowly escaped with their lives, and I don't know if they have any idea how lucky they actually are. So now he's in Montana State Prison. Okay, so while serving his 15-year sentence, Jeremy was given the opportunity to participate in a program that, if completed, could knock some time off of his sentence. At this time, no one was aware that he had committed 2 murders and almost committed 2 more. Now, the potential to get released early was something he just couldn't pass up, so of course he agreed to participate in this program. The program had strict rules, was very structured, had multiple classes and groups that inmates were required to pass in order to be considered for early release. It was somewhat of a boot camp, military style, mixed with group setting and classes to take for life skills, okay? So the inmates were told that they have to be honest and not hold back if classes and groups were to help them. Now, one of these classes was an anger management class. It was a group that the inmates would sit around and discuss with a counselor. And one day during this group, Jeremy just blurted out and confessed to murdering both Dawn and James. An administrator pulled him aside, told him that he had the right to stop incriminating himself, but he continued giving every single gruesome detail of the crimes. And later he continued to talk about these evil deeds to other inmates, almost bragging about killing them to anybody and everybody who would listen. It's like once that can of worms was open, he just couldn't stop them from spilling out. It was like he was proud of it or something. He was soon pulled from the program. He was placed into custody, separated from the other inmates, and prison officials contacted authorities in Helena, and they let those authorities know about Jeremy's confession, and then they later came down there and questioned Jeremy, and then had him transported to Helena, where he repeated his story, and then he gave the location of where the bodies had been dumped. And officers were able to locate the 55-gallon drum with missing mother and son decomposing inside. Jeremy was then charged with 2 counts of deliberate homicide, and after only a 2-day trial, the jury swiftly found him guilty on both counts of deliberate homicide, and he was then sentenced to 2 life sentences to be served in the Montana State Prison. He eventually exhausted all of his appeals, and each one was denied. His final appeal was on the grounds that he was forced to give this confession against his will, because they said that he had to be completely honest to pass the program, and he felt like that was kind of entrapment. He felt like it should have been, what he said in the group should have been confidential, because it was mandatory to pass the class. However, the appeals court found that, well, first of all, he didn't have to take the class in the first place. It was written in the contract that anything and everything you say could be used against you, that he signed that contract prior to. He also had no expectation of privacy or for it to be confidential when he was bragging about it to other inmates or to other officers. And so the appeal was denied. It was shut down, thrown out. And then in 2014, I guess he got tired of not having enough money on his books or something, because obviously his dad wasn't going to give him any more money because his dad lost his home last time he tried to help. So in 2014, Woods attempted to make money with a frivolous lawsuit. According to Jeremy, not only didn't the inmates like him, but neither did the guards. And he contended in this lawsuit that the guards knew that the prisoners wanted to beat him up. The guards put him in the position where he could be beaten up. The prisoners proceeded to beat him up, and the guards allowed it to happen. Jeremy was treated in the infirmary at the prison for a day. His injuries were not severe. He got a good ass whooping. That was about it. And he wanted to be put in protective custody, but then that's a lonely place to be, so he wanted them to put him back in general population, but in a different area, the area for the child molesters and child baby killers and such. But he had already been beaten on, and so he was suing the state of Montana and the prison system for cruel and unusual punishment, and he was asking for punitive damages of $1,000 for every time that he got hit by another inmate. Obviously, his case was thrown out, and as of the filming of this video, Jeremy Williams remains a prisoner in Montana, in I believe Deer Lodge. And as I said earlier, he is serving 2 consecutive life sentences. He is not eligible to go in front of the parole board until the year 2056, if he is even still alive then, because by then he will be 84 years old. Unfortunately, he was showcased in an episode of I Almost Got Away With It, and watching that episode made me absolutely sick. Now, although, without that episode, I wouldn't have been able to make this episode, because there's really no information out there about this case. But I really wish they would have put a little bit more emphasis on what a piece of shit he was, instead of letting him sit there and tell his story, and watching him smile while telling the story of how he hung a 20-month-old baby to his death, as his bound and frantic mother listened helplessly from the other room, and how he then proceeded to strangle Dawn to death, all because he didn't have the balls to simply break up with her. I absolutely couldn't stand seeing how proud he was of his crimes and how much fun he was having getting the attention, the cameras on him and such. It made me want to vomit in my mouth. I couldn't. It made me wish that maybe hitting him was not as far as those other prisoners would have went. But I digress. I am, however, glad that he has been caught, that he is serving time. Unfortunate that he didn't get the death penalty, though I think he's actually suffering more in prison than putting him down. But he shouldn't be allowed to breathe air. I mean, let him suffer a bit and then just put his ass down, because the chance in hell that he might have to get out scares the shit out of me. I would hate for him to be able to get out and live his life. And as happy as he looked in that video means he's having a decent time in prison, and that makes me sick. It makes me sick. I'm going to end this video by reading the memorial that was written, that I found on findagrave.com, and it was written for both Dawn Lynette Wallace and James William Wallace, and it reads as follows. Dawn's fiance, Jeremy Woods, murdered both of them. He physically abused Dawn and apparently thought murder was the way to end a relationship. He was planning on killing his next girlfriend, but law enforcement caught him first. He confessed to the murders in an anger management group session while in prison in Montana on a check fraud conviction. He's serving 2 consecutive life sentences and will never again hurt an innocent woman or child. I'd love to thank all of you for joining me here today for this very disturbing ass story. And my heart goes out to the loved ones of Dawn and James Wallace, as I know yours does as well. Such a senseless loss of life. I am grateful, though, that the perpetrator was brought to justice and that the family got closure and at least know what happened to their loved ones. So many families do not get that little tiny bit of relief, if you can call it that. I do hope to see you again next time for the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell next to the subscribe button so that YouTube notifies you whenever I upload new videos. I also hope that you will press the like button and share this video. It helps more than you could imagine, and it's much appreciated. And also, if you please leave your comments down below. I always respond to comments, and I absolutely love hearing what you have to say and having a dialogue with my watchers. So, until next time, y'all stay safe out there.